I'm Selena Avery, 28, standing beneath a crystal chandelier in a gown worth more than my first car, fingers curled around the microphone that will flip everything upside down. Just 6 months ago, my parents forced me to marry Jacob, a so-called nobody they claimed would knock me down a peg. "It's what you deserve after your little stunt," my mother Lorraine sneered as she zipped up my wedding dress. What they didn't know? Jacob's portfolio could buy out my parents' entire estate twice over. And tonight, at their glitzy anniversary party in a Manhattan rooftop ballroom, I'm about to unveil just how far their arrogance blinded them. But before I tell you how the daughter they tried to humiliate turned their world upside down, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have stood beside you, hit that like and subscribe button. This story's for you. Growing up as Selena Avery meant breathing in privilege like air. Our penthouse overlooked Central Park, where every morning began with a fresh bouquet in the foyer and a staff of 5 anticipating our whims. My father, Charles Avery, expanded his father's modest antique business into a luxury home empire that catered to celebrities and politicians. My mother, Lorraine, ruled our social calendar like a seasoned diplomat, with sharp stilettos and sharper words. From the gold-inlaid piano in the drawing room to the ice sculpture centerpieces she insisted on for charity auctions, our world was curated perfection. By 7, I could identify French silverware patterns. By 10, I was giving interviews to fashion blogs. "Chin up, Selena," she'd whisper at black tie galas, gently lifting my chin with her diamond-encrusted finger. And Avery never looks defeated. My wardrobe was custom-fitted, my beauty routine imported from Paris, my smile carefully rehearsed. My younger sister, Fiona, 5 years behind me, was both my shadow and my rival. She'd perch on my vanity, watching me curl my lashes. "Teach me how you do your eyeliner," she'd plead. "Mom says I'll never have your poise, but I'm trying." That was Lorraine's specialty, divide and conquer. One day she'd praise me, the next she'd elevate Fiona instead. Underneath our designer gowns, we were both just girls carrying the weight of our mother's expectations. Her closest confidant, Cynthia Langford, was her enforcer, wealthy, polished, and always watching. And tonight, they'll all witness what happens when the girl they tried to break becomes the one holding the spotlight. "Selena, sweetheart," Cynthia Langford would coo, slipping beside me at charity luncheons, clutching her crystal champagne flute. "That young man you were speaking with, his family runs a chain of discount mattress stores, don't they? How refreshingly down-to-earth your taste has become." Until I turned 26, I never misstepped. Vassar Undergraduate London School of Economics for my master's. A leadership role waiting for me at Avery and Langford Interiors, my father's luxury design firm. I traveled in the right circles, attended the right galleries, dated polished men with old family ties, and maintained the weight mother labeled gracefully slender, never fragile. Then I made the fatal mistake. I dreamed for myself. "We're interior architects, not boutique owners," Father said, squinting at my proposal across his mahogany desk. "Dad, it's not a boutique. It's curated fashion. I've researched a niche for emerging designers underserved in Midtown. The projections show real promise." "Enough." He waved a hand, already skimming the Times. "I'll fund it. Call it tuition for a lesson I won't need to repeat." And for a few dazzling months, Atelier Selena shined. Floor-to-ceiling windows, soft brass fixtures, and racks of Parisian newcomers drew stylists, celebrities, even a Vogue feature. My partner, Justine Alcott, managed the books while I crafted the vision. Then came the accountant's call. "The accounts have been drained, Miss Avery. Nearly $280,000 owed. And Justine is unreachable." She'd vanished, leaving behind forged invoices, fake supplier contacts, and angry vendors demanding payment. Turns out, she'd pulled this scheme before, under different names. The Boston Post featured the story under the headline, "Uptown Heiress Duped in Midtown Fashion Fraud." At the next board meeting, I felt every eye, the murmurs, the smirks behind false sympathy. At home, the fallout hit hard. "You embarrassed the family," Father roared one evening, slamming his napkin down at dinner. You didn't vet your partner? Have you learned nothing? Charles, please, Mother muttered, before leveling her gaze at me. Selena, we gave you trust. You responded with recklessness. Within days, my Fifth Avenue apartment, still legally under Avery and Langford, was reclaimed. My Amex was deactivated. I was relocated to a guest suite at our estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. My Porsche, replaced with a 12-year-old Volvo wagon, which Mother called character building. Every holiday, every brunch, became a stage for my humiliation. Meanwhile, my cousin's mild accomplishments were paraded like Nobel Prizes. But what they didn't realize? I was quietly preparing the real lesson. And soon, they'd all have front row seats. The Avery name had survived its share of whispered scandals. Great Uncle Wesley's art forgery fiasco. Aunt Corinne's very public affair with her Pilates instructor. But somehow, my boutique's collapse became the unforgivable sin. 6 months of purgatory followed. I applied for roles at fashion labels, trend publications, even showroom internships, only to discover that my family's name, once a golden key, now locked doors. My designer heels sat untouched in the back of a closet, replaced by modest flats and muted blouses handpicked by my mother, who believed penance should look humble. But it wasn't the clothes or the exile from Manhattan galas that broke me. It was the quiet erasure of the woman I had built, confident, creative, independent, reduced to a walking cautionary tale, a punchline over Bellinis at the country club. Even Avery girls can falter, they'd whisper, shaking their heads in mock sympathy. The intervention came on a dreary Tuesday in April. I walked into the formal sitting room in our Greenwich estate to find Father in his usual leather armchair, Mother rigid beside him in silk and pearls, and a man in a bland gray suit standing stiffly near the fireplace. Sit down, Selena, Father said, his voice strained, face flushed with frustration. Or perhaps the beginnings of a blood pressure spike. Mother delicately placed a manicured hand on his to signal restraint. Your father and I have made a decision, she began, voice coated in the same false sweetness she used when dismissing longtime housekeepers. This cannot go on. I've applied to 37 positions, I protested, already knowing they didn't care. Many were firms with Avery ties, each rejection likely a family favor. And proven your inability to stand on your own, Mother snapped. Father cleared his throat. You remember Theodore Langford, our attorney? His associate's son, Jacob, has agreed to marry you. The man in the suit stepped forward. I blinked. He wasn't a lawyer. He was the plan. Jacob Langston, he said, extending a hand I didn't take. His appearance was utterly forgettable. Average height, brown hair, off-the-rack gray suit, a digital watch from a pharmacy. I laughed. You expect me to marry a stranger because of one business mistake? This isn't a negotiation, Mother said coolly. You'll marry Jacob, who's willing to look past your reputation. In return, you'll get a modest apartment, an entry-level job at the firm. And if I refuse, Father's eyes narrowed, then you leave this house with nothing but what you came with. No connections, no references, no financial support. That's your choice, Mother said, her tone razor-sharp under the velvet calm. And your father's heart can't take much more stress. The guilt hit like a slap. I fled the room and climbed 2 floors to the one place that still felt safe, Fiona's bedroom. My 23-year-old sister sat cross-legged on her tufted bench, already out of her riding boots and wrapped in a soft, cable-knit sweater. Her expression said it all. She knew. They've been planning this for weeks, she admitted, twisting her Vassar graduation ring around her finger. It's not about punishing you anymore, Selena. It's about controlling the story. What story? I asked, pacing. If you marry this Jacob guy and take a humble little job, they get to tell the world it's a redemption arc. You, the wild heiress, came to your senses, got grounded, and married some quiet, steady man. And who even is he? I demanded. Financial consultant, Fiona replied with a shrug. Works for a mid-sized wealth firm. Dad's attorney says he's reliable. Mom likes that he's forgettable, she added. He won't draw attention. He fits their image. 3 days later, I found myself across from Jacob Langston at a forgettable Italian restaurant in Soho. He pulled up in a silver Honda Civic, almost identical to the used Volvo I'd been banished to, and wore the same bland suit from our last meeting. After dinner, he insisted I see his apartment, a top-floor unit in a converted brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. The space was clean and sparse. Practical furniture, plain walls, a bookshelf lined with classic novels, and not a hint of color or personality. "I know this isn't ideal," he said, watching me take it all in. "But I think we could build something functional." "Functional?" I echoed. "That's your pitch? No spark? No compatibility?" "Would you prefer I pretend?" he asked flatly. "We both know this is transactional." I narrowed my eyes. "And what are your reasons for agreeing to marry a stranger?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. He disappeared into a small office, shutting the door. His muffled voice changed, firm, commanding, and confident. Curious. In desperation, I arranged to meet Tyler Reed, my ex from business school. We'd split amicably when he took a job in Chicago. But now, he was back in Boston and had reached out more than once. Over cocktails at a quiet midtown bar, Tyler leaned in. His custom suit was crisp, Rolex catching the candlelight. "This is insane, Selena," he said. "They can't possibly expect you to go through with it." "They've left me no choice," I muttered, swirling the straw in my untouched drink. "They're using Dad's heart condition as emotional blackmail." Tyler leaned back, watching me with the careful calculation I used to mistake for concern. "What if there was another way?" he offered. "What if you had a different groom? Someone your parents had already approved of? Before everything fell apart." My heart thumped. "You'd do that for me?" His expression shifted. Smooth, rehearsed, almost professional. "Selena, I've always cared about you. And let's be honest, the Avery name still carries weight. Tying myself to that again wouldn't hurt my career trajectory. We were good once. Maybe this could work. For both of us." The glint in his eye gave it away. Not "I love you," but "you're still useful." Not "let me save you," but "maybe I can salvage this for my benefit too." I left Tyler sitting there with his half-finished Manhattan and walked 6 blocks in Louboutins that bit into my heels with every step. With each click against the pavement, the truth grew louder. Without my name, I was nothing to them, even to someone I once gave my heart. But the real breaking point came at my final wedding dress fitting. Mother had selected a modest ivory sheath, unembellished, demure, and deliberately joyless. "The Langston boy is doing us a favor accepting you," she said calmly, motioning the seamstress to pinch the waist tighter. "Let's not make this more theatrical than it needs to be." I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Stiff posture, blank expression, drowning in pearls and expectations. I didn't look like a bride. I looked like a pawn. A lesson. The wedding day arrived with cruel perfection. Blue skies, blooming tulips, the kind of backdrop that mocked you with its serenity. Mother had scaled back the affair to something tasteful in the garden of our Greenwich estate. "Nothing too lavish considering the circumstances," she told the planner, not bothering to lower her voice. "We're leaning into family values." Reinvention. The morning passed in a blur. Makeup to erase fatigue. Hair wound tightly like a warning. The ivory dress clung like silence. "You look appropriate," Mother remarked, adjusting a single strand of pearls. "Smile. People know this isn't the wedding we imagined, but we have to maintain dignity." Father walked me down the aisle with a grip that felt more like enforcement than support. 50 guests, trimmed down from the original 300, watched my descent with practiced sympathy and whispered judgments. Cynthia Langford even dabbed at non-existent tears while murmuring to the woman beside her. My college roommate from Vassar, Genevieve, declined her invitation with a vaguely worded scheduling conflict, which clearly didn't interfere with her posting sun-drenched photos from St. Bart's that same weekend. Even the pastor's homily, given by one of our longtime family ministers, was laced with not-so-subtle references to humility, accepting one's place, and embracing the lessons of struggle. Jacob stood at the altar, surprisingly composed in a suit only slightly more refined than the one he wore to our first meeting. When I reached him, he gave my hand a soft, steadying squeeze. The first human gesture of warmth I'd felt in months. "Just breathe," he whispered. That one moment of calm felt more grounding than anything else that day. The reception drifted by in a haze of tepid hors d'oeuvres and thinly veiled condescension. "Marriage will settle you, dear," said Aunt Margaret, patting my cheek like I was 12. "Some women simply aren't built for leadership. The Langston boy seems steady," Father's golf partner, William, offered with all the enthusiasm of someone endorsing a dishwasher. Then I noticed Jacob's guests, only 5 of them, seated quietly at their modest table. They weren't draped in designer gowns or flashing family diamonds. Their attire was simple, well-fitted, and purposeful. They watched everything with quiet curiosity and intelligence. One woman, graceful, silver-streaked hair pulled into a low twist, met my gaze and lifted her champagne flute in a silent toast. Her expression held no pity, just understanding. The gifts were equally telling. Gone were the embossed designer boxes and showy luxury brands that had flooded Fiona's wedding. In their place, blenders, linens, cutlery sets, and Mother's pièce de résistance, a deed to a starter apartment and 2 employment contracts at Avery and Langford. "Entry-level roles appropriate for your current trajectory," Father explained, his voice tinged with judgment. "Jacob will join wealth management. You'll start as administrative support." We left in Jacob's Honda, not the vintage Rolls-Royce that carried Charlotte Avery down Fifth Avenue after her lavish wedding. There was no European honeymoon, just 2 nights at a bed and breakfast in the Berkshires, then back to our new life. The apartment, a 3rd-floor walk-up in a former shoe factory in Brooklyn, had 2 bedrooms, a passable kitchen, and furniture Mother had curated for its neutral elegance. The master featured twin beds. "They can be pushed together," she'd added, as if that softened the humiliation. "Home sweet home," Jacob said, setting down our suitcase. "This isn't a home," I muttered, staring at the beige-on-beige living room. "It's a holding cell." The next morning began with me, bleary-eyed, staring down a coffee maker I didn't know how to use. "Welcome to the new normal," Jacob observed my domestic floundering with an almost unsettling calm. "I can help you figure out a basic grocery list and meal plan," he offered one evening, finding me standing blankly in front of our fridge, which was as empty as my enthusiasm. "Why aren't you more upset about this?" I snapped, waving a hand around our beige-walled, popcorn-ceiling department. "You've been forced to marry a stranger and live in a glorified shoebox." He didn't flinch. "I've lived with less," he said simply, "and no one forced me. I agreed to this." That cryptic reply hung in the air like dust in the afternoon light. We settled into a polite, awkward rhythm. Jacob left early every morning for his job at a boutique financial firm downtown, returning in the evening to find me unraveling over my mind-numbing admin role at Avery and Langford. My tasks included data entry, coffee runs, and being corrected by my supervisor, Jennifer, who clearly relished supervising a former socialite. "Reports are organized by client, not by date," she reminded me, lips twitching with smugness. "Even Mr. Avery expects his daughter to follow protocol." Weekends took on their own strange cadence. Jacob often claimed he had client strategy meetings, oddly frequent for someone in a junior position. He'd vanish for hours, sometimes entire Saturdays. His home office remained locked, and when he took calls, his voice would shift. Confident, clipped, unmistakably authoritative. Then there were the packages, delivered discreetly, always stashed behind that locked door within minutes. My unease simmered with curiosity. Who was this man? Why would he agree to marry someone like me so willingly? One Saturday afternoon, Fiona showed up unannounced with a bottle of red and a raised eyebrow. "This place isn't awful," she said, peering into the modest kitchen. "It has character. It has a warped floorboard and a faucet that screams," I muttered, pouring generous glasses of Cabernet. She paused. "Jacob's not what I expected." "What were you expecting? Creepy and desperate?" "Honestly, yeah, but he's neither. He actually reminds me of Dad. Before the Empire, focused, smart, watchful. That night, Jacob brought home takeout from a Thai place that was far beyond what our starter couple budget should have allowed. Thai again? I asked, suspicious. Life's too short for bad pad Thai, he replied with a smirk. Later, as the three of us assembled a wobbly IKEA bookshelf, one of my screws split the board. I believe that's what structural engineers call an epic fail, Jacob said dryly. I laughed, genuinely, for the first time in months. After Fiona left, Jacob and I sat with coffee and fortune cookies, and something quietly shifted between us. Thank you for being kind to my sister, I said, the words slipping out before I could weigh them. Fiona didn't ask for this mess, and somehow he knew that. She sees you more clearly than your parents ever have, Jacob replied, cracking open his fortune cookie. She admires your strength. I let out a soft, bitter laugh. What strength? I'm living in an arranged marriage, in an apartment decorated with leftover furniture from my parents' lake house storage. He looked at me, truly looked, with a steadiness I wasn't prepared for. The strength it takes to survive after losing everything you thought defined you. Most people would have crumbled. Something shifted in that moment. Not affection, not yet, but a kind of respect began to form. Fragile, but real. I still slept in my twin bed. I still resented the powerlessness. I still questioned his weekend disappearances and mysterious packages. But for the first time, I began to see Jacob Langston as a person, not a punishment. 6 months into our technically legal marriage, I woke past midnight to find his bed empty. Again. Usually, I respected his need for space, whatever this secret junior financial consultant life entailed. But that day had been especially humiliating at Avery and Langford, and my tolerance had worn thin. Following the faint hum of his voice, I reached the office door. Normally locked. Tonight, it opened. The room beyond was a world apart from the rest of our modest apartment. 3 high-end monitors glowed with financial tickers and complex analytics. A Bloomberg terminal sat in the corner, flanked by sleek equipment I knew cost more than my annual salary. The walls were lined with dense economics texts, business law volumes, and titles in 3 languages. And there was Jacob, headset on, speaking into a mic with the calm urgency of someone used to commanding decisions. The Singapore acquisition must close before their market opens. Have legal draft the final docs for my sign-off. Wilson will handle PR. Use the standard synergy language. He turned and saw me, standing there in my faded pajamas, like a ghost in someone else's life. I'll handle the rest tomorrow. Good night, he said into the mic and clicked off. We stared at each other. You're not a junior analyst, I said quietly. No, he replied, unflinching. I'm not. He opened a drawer, pulled out a business magazine, and slid it toward me. On the cover, The Invisible Billionaire. Inside the mind behind Aurora Investments. Jacob Langston was the CEO. Your initials, MP, I whispered, staring at the magazine in disbelief. Mason Parker? Jacob Langston is the name I use publicly, he confirmed calmly. Mason Parker, CEO and founder of Aurora Investments. Current estimated net worth, around $4.2 billion. My brain scrambled to process fragments of business headlines I had once ignored. Rumors about an elusive financial genius whose firm had quietly outperformed Wall Street titans. Speculations about a reclusive billionaire who avoided cameras, boardrooms, and egos. But why the secrecy? I asked. Why marry me? Why live like this? I gestured wildly to the modest apartment around us. Jacob, Mason, finally looked animated. I value privacy and authenticity. I didn't come from wealth. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Chicago, worked my way through Illinois State, built Aurora from scratch, deal by deal. He began to pace the room. The more successful I became, the more people treated me like a transaction. Everyone wanted something: access, investment, favors. I decided the only way to stay grounded was to strip away the noise. Live modestly. Be unseen. I stared at him. So, Marrying me was what? Some kind of sociological experiment? His expression darkened. It started with business. I recoiled. I knew of your family through corporate channels, he said. When Theodore Langford approached me about this arrangement, I saw it as an opportunity, a way to assess the Averys up close before finalizing key acquisitions involving your father's firm. My stomach churned. So, I was due diligence? At first, he admitted, but then something changed. I watched you, stripped of everything your world said made you valuable. You struggled. You resisted. You adapted. I turned away, heat rising in my throat. My humiliation was compelling? My collapse? Interesting data? No, he said softly. Your resilience was. He tapped a few keys. Files opened on the screen. Rebecca Collins, your former business partner, used 3 other names in prior scams. And 2 weeks before she approached you, your mother's foundation donated $250,000 to a nonprofit directly tied to one of Rebecca's aliases. That's circumstantial, I said, though my heart was pounding. He clicked again. Banking records filled the screen. Transfers linking Lorraine Avery to shell accounts. My blood ran cold. She engineered your fall, he said, so she and your father could step in, reclaim control, and reestablish your dependence. I could barely speak. Why would she do that? Mason looked straight at me. Because control isn't love. It's strategy. Your boutique was thriving, Mason said. You were building independence, forming a network outside the Avery orbit. For someone like your mother, who defines herself through control, that threatened the entire dynamic. I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to absorb the weight of it all. And how long have you known this? I suspected before the arrangement, he admitted. I confirmed it about 3 months ago. Then why didn't you tell me? I demanded. His expression shifted. Earnest, almost hesitant. Because you needed to rediscover your own strength. If I had handed you the truth before you were ready to act on it, it would have only deepened the wound. I was quiet for a long moment. So, now what? What am I supposed to do with this? That depends on what you want, he said gently. Revenge? Reconciliation? Freedom? Something else? And just like that, for the first time in my adult life, someone wasn't telling me who I should be. He was asking. I want justice, I said. And I want my life back. Not the version they curated, but something real. Mine? He nodded. I can help, if you'll let me. Why? I asked. What's in it for you? His gaze didn't waver. A partner. Someone who sees me. Not just the money or the brand. Someone who understands both illusion and reality, and still chooses truth. I exhaled a disbelieving laugh. That sounds dangerously close to a real marriage. Maybe it could be, he said, voice softer than I'd ever heard it. That night, for the first time, we pushed the twin beds together. Not for romance, but to face one another, honestly in the quiet dark, stripping away expectations and pretending nothing. He told me about growing up on the south side of Chicago, his mother cleaning houses, the algorithm he coded in college that became the foundation of Aurora. I told him about my childhood full of conditional affection, the years of curated perfection, the unspoken rules I broke by dreaming of a boutique rather than brokerage. I never wanted their empire, I said. I wanted to create something beautiful and useful, something that was mine. You still can, Mason replied, and I can help clear your name. The next morning, he reached for my hand, not as my husband, but as my partner. His eyes sparkled. Shall we get to work? Partners? Mason asked. I took his hand. For the first time in nearly a year, I felt something stir that wasn't grief or resentment. It was hope. Our partnership began, not with grand declarations, but with learning. Mason cleared his calendar for 2 full weeks. Our modest Brooklyn apartment transformed into a makeshift war room. Whiteboards replaced art on the walls, binders filled with spreadsheets and transaction histories took over our coffee table, and takeout from Manhattan's best kitchens powered our late-night strategy sessions. The first step, Mason said, is understanding what really happened with your boutique. Not the version your mother peddled, not what the tabloids printed, but the actual facts. He introduced me to Grace Lopez, the silver-haired woman I'd seen toasting me at our wedding. Aurora's chief strategy officer and Mason's longtime mentor, Grace had decades of corporate intelligence experience under her belt. "Your business model was solid," she said after reviewing my original pitch deck. "Your inventory strategy showed early insight. Many of those designers have since broken into the mainstream. With proper backing, you would have been profitable within 18 months. That validation, objective, professional, and sincere, healed a part of me I hadn't even realized was still raw. I hadn't failed because I was unworthy. I had been sabotaged. Mason became my tutor in everything: equity structures, investment portfolios, market analysis. He made complex ideas feel graspable. I devoured each lesson, hungry to reclaim my narrative. "You have sharp instincts," he told me, one evening after I flagged a flaw in a business proposal. "You just needed the technical framework. That's fixable." Grace assigned real-world exercises, breaking down annual reports, spotting manipulative language in board memos, identifying fraud indicators. With every successful task, I rebuilt a little more of the confidence my parents had spent a lifetime controlling. Our deeper investigation into Rebecca Collins confirmed she was no simple opportunist. Her aliases, Rachel Carter, Renee Campbell, Rita Chambers, all followed a chilling pattern: establish trust, solicit investment, disappear. "She would have failed any legitimate background check," Mason said, "unless someone purposely ignored the red flags." That someone? William Harris, my father's longtime associate, the man who'd recommended Rebecca in the first place. "William's been the Avery family fixer for decades," Grace explained. "He handles problems your father doesn't want to see." Mason's team uncovered offshore accounts linking William to both Rebecca and sizable disbursements from Lorraine Avery's personal charity. "She didn't just know," Mason said, sliding over the forensic accounting file. "Your mother funded it. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after being broken by the very people meant to protect you, you won't want to miss what happens next. So tap that subscribe button and stay with me. The real reckoning is just beginning." William had identified and recruited Rebecca, then ensured her background check came back clean. Together, they orchestrated the perfect collapse, ensuring my boutique failed just dramatically enough to justify my parents' intervention. Each new revelation hardened my resolve. "This wasn't impulsive," I said during one of our strategy sessions. "This was a calculated takedown." "Because it served multiple purposes," Grace explained. "It publicly discredited your judgment, painted you as emotionally and financially fragile, and justified your parents' control, while reinforcing their narrative that real success only comes through the Avery legacy. Control through humiliation," Mason added. "It's devastatingly effective. They broke your confidence so completely, marrying a modest consultant felt like rescue instead of punishment." Then came the opportunity we'd been waiting for. My mother's assistant called with a coldly formal tone. "Mr. and Mrs. Avery request your presence at their 35th anniversary celebration. Black tie, 7 p.m., the season's ballroom." I hung up, turned to Mason, and, for the first time in months, smiled. "We've just received our invitation to the perfect stage." The guest list would be stacked with every power player in their social and business circles. Everyone who had watched me fall. Everyone who'd silently nodded along with my parents' version of the story. Mason moved swiftly, inviting Aurora executives, embedding tech access into the ballroom's AV system, compiling the evidence into a presentation no one could spin away from. Meanwhile, Grace trained me with ruthless precision. "They'll try to break you emotionally," she warned. "Expect your mother to interrupt, your father to invoke sympathy. Stay calm. Stay factual." James Wilson, Aurora's discreet security chief, helped me build psychological defenses. "Your father's heart," he said, "will be used like a trump card. Don't react. Anticipate." While the professional plan took shape, my personal transformation moved slower, but deeper. Mason handed me his black card. "Find something that makes you feel powerful." I didn't return to Fifth Avenue or old designer haunts. Instead, I visited Olivia Chin, a young designer I'd once supported, one of the few who hadn't vanished after the scandal. "Selena!" she gasped, pulling me into a warm hug. "I've been trying to reach you for months." That embrace, genuine and undeservedly loyal, meant more than all the couture in Manhattan. "Your mother's assistant always says you're unavailable," Olivia mentioned as she pinned the final hem. The casual comment hit harder than expected, yet another revelation of how thoroughly my mother had isolated me, even from those who tried to reach out. The gown Olivia created was nothing like the muted tones my mother preferred. It was deep crimson, structured with bold architectural lines that projected power, not decoration. "This isn't just a dress," Olivia said, adjusting the bodice. "It's armor." 2 weeks before the gala, Mason gently suggested I reach out to Fiona. "She's been paying more attention than you think," he said. "She visits the old boutique every month, like she's mourning something." We met for coffee at a quiet spot in Soho, well outside the Avery bubble. Fiona looked perfect, as always. Sleek ponytail, crisp cream blouse, but beneath the polish was exhaustion. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom's been unbearable since you left," she admitted, stirring her drink. "With you gone, I've become the target." She called my dress bohemian nonsense and replaced my wardrobe overnight. "Fiona, my business didn't fail by accident," I began carefully. Her eyes widened, but not in surprise. "I've suspected," she whispered. "I overheard Dad and William arguing, something about payments to the Collins woman. Then, during the charity gala, I found foundation documents, old photos of Rebecca with different names." I stared at her. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I wanted to, but by the time I knew, you were already married, and Mom monitors everything, my calls, my location. I've been waiting for a safe chance." We spoke for hours, planning Fiona's role not as an active player, too dangerous, but as a quiet witness, someone our parents couldn't easily dismiss. The night before the gala, Mason and I finalized everything. Evidence ready, presentations loaded, contingencies prepared. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Once this begins, there's no undoing it. Your relationship with them, it won't survive." Moments later, Fiona joined us, radiant in navy with statement earrings that whispered quiet defiance. "Everything's moving to Mother's schedule," she said. "Toasts start in 20 minutes. First up, William Harris." "Perfect," Mason murmured, leading us to a quiet corner where Grace and Olivia waited. "All files are loaded," Grace said. "James secured the AV. No overrides possible." Olivia squeezed my hand. "Fashion blogs already posted your entrance. The internet loves a redemption arc." Whatever happened next, the spotlight was already shifting. Right on cue, the orchestra softened as William Harris, my father's longtime associate and fixer, lightly tapped his crystal flute for attention. His toast, ornate and insincere, praised the Avery family values of integrity, perseverance, and timeless leadership, while making veiled references to the challenges that strengthen blood ties. 3 more speakers followed, each layering on another coat of carefully rehearsed praise, reinforcing the myth of the Avery dynasty as morally unimpeachable, united by tradition, and destined for generational greatness. My mother, radiant in her custom ice blue couture, flown in from Paris, glided toward the microphone. Her tone struck the perfect balance between grace and gravity, modulated for admiration. "Raymond and I are deeply moved by your presence tonight," she began, eyes damp with theatrical emotion. "Family has always been our compass. It's the foundation of our marriage, our business, and our legacy," she continued, weaving polished humility into every sentence. "Like all families, we face difficulties, but with love, guidance, and, above all, commitment to our values, those challenges have only made us stronger." Her gaze found me across the room, smile tight, voice softening. "We believe even missteps can become milestones. Realignment begins with family." And then she delivered the line she'd practiced in every mirror. "And now, with love, We invite our daughter Selena to share a few words. Despite recent challenges, family remains family. The room offered gentle applause, some hesitant. The spotlight swung to me. I rose, Mason's hand steady at my back, and walked to the stage. Measured, sure, I took the microphone and faced them. The family friends who turned silent, the executives who blacklisted me, the cousins who smirked behind champagne glasses. "Thank you, Mother," I began smoothly. "It's an honor to speak on your special night. Tonight, we celebrate 35 years of partnership between Raymond and Lorraine Avery, built, as we've heard, on family values, unwavering support, and moral excellence." My mother's smile sparkled in approval. I continued, letting the tempo shift. Those values were emphasized my whole life. Integrity above all, family supporting family, and the Avery name representing trust. I paused, then leveled my voice, which is why it's been so educational to learn what happens when those values are traded. For control. Her smile froze. My father's glass lowered. The room hushed. 1 year ago, I launched a boutique featuring rising designers. I said steadily. The model was solid, the location ideal, and the initial response promising. Then, without warning, my business partner, Rebecca Collins, emptied our accounts and disappeared. A murmur rolled through the ballroom. I gestured toward Rebecca, who had started inching toward the back. But James Wilson, composed and immovable, stepped casually into her path. What I didn't know then, but have since uncovered, is that Rebecca Collins wasn't just a con artist. She was handpicked, vetted, and placed in my business by individuals determined to ensure its failure. All around the ballroom, screens flickered to life. Bank statements appeared, highlighting transfers from the Lorraine Avery Foundation to shell companies connected to Rebecca's known aliases, then emails, William Harris coordinating timelines. Subject lines like, "the daughter situation," gasps spread like wildfire. I kept my voice measured, Grace's coaching in every breath. These records show a direct link between my mother's charitable foundation and Rebecca's offshore accounts, transactions made just before our partnership began, and again, immediately after she disappeared with our funds. A pause, then the next screen. An email from my father. She needs to understand limits before she destroys herself. This will realign her. This was not just sabotage, I said. It was strategy. A campaign designed to strip me of credibility, corral my future, and place me in an arranged marriage that was meant to erase me from public view while preserving family optics. My mother shot up from her seat, eyes flashing. "This is absurd. Selena has clearly been manipulated." "By whom, Mother?" I asked calmly. "By Mason?" I turned to him, and with perfect timing, he stepped forward onto the stage. "Allow me to introduce my husband properly," I said. "This is Mason Parker, founder and CEO of Aurora Investments. Current valuation, $68 billion. Gasps again. The screens behind us shifted. Forbes profiles, performance charts, investment headlines. Mason stood silently as the weight of his identity landed. A shocked voice broke the silence. Eleanor Whitfield, from the front table. "Good God!" Mason entered our marriage for his own strategic reasons, I continued, but what developed between us was something my parents could never manufacture. Authentic partnership based on trust and truth. The very values they preach, but never practiced. My father stood now, face alarmingly red. "This public display is unconscionable," my father snapped, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "My heart condition is being monitored by 2 cardiologists, both on Aurora's board, who are present tonight." Mason stepped beside me, his tone calm, his presence unshakable. "Your health is being carefully observed, Raymond. Though it's worth noting how conveniently your symptoms tend to emerge under pressure." My mother tried to reach the stage, but the screens pressed forward, relentless. Images, documents, emails. Each slide exposing the systematic isolation tactics employed to cut me off from friends, allies, and opportunity. coordinated efforts between William Harris and Rebecca Collins, records of closed-door conversations, meetings, financial directives, and the strategic social blacklisting that followed. "I want to be clear," I said. "The Avery reputation for business excellence is deserved. My parents built something remarkable with vision and resolve." I let the room sit in that truth for just a breath before continuing. But what deserves examination is the character behind that success, the willingness to dismantle their own daughter's future in order to preserve control. The final slides appeared. My original boutique proposal, financial forecasts, and glowing reviews from independent retail consultants, validating its promise. I held the silence before speaking again. "I'm not here for sympathy or revenge. I'm here to reclaim my truth. My business didn't collapse because of failure. It was deliberately sabotaged because my independence disrupted a legacy built not on love, but obedience." Around the room, Mason's team moved with practiced coordination. Executives engaged key figures in conversation. Fashion journalists quietly recorded statements. Under mounting pressure and the looming threat of charges, Rebecca began talking, naming William Harris as the architect. Mother finally reached the stage, her calm unraveling. "How dare you hijack our anniversary for this performance?" she hissed. "After everything we've sacrificed." "The only sacrifice made," I said softly, "was my autonomy. And it wasn't given, it was stolen, through calculated manipulation." Father joined her, flushed and furious, but notably lacking the familiar hand-to-chest theatrics. "This relationship can be salvaged, Selena, but only if you show proper atonement." "This isn't a performance," Mason interjected. "It's truth, backed by facts, something a family that preaches integrity should understand." As Rebecca was quietly escorted out by security, murmurs filled the room. The illusion of unity was gone. Then Fiona appeared, walking calmly to the stage. She took her place beside me, not our parents. Her silent stand said everything. The Avery myth had shattered, and truth had taken its place. The dynasty built on appearances over substance had met its reckoning, not in scandalous headlines or whispered gossip, but through precise, irrefutable exposure. As Mason and I stepped out of the Waldorf ballroom, leaving behind the remains of the carefully orchestrated Avery narrative, he leaned in and murmured, "This isn't the end. It's the beginning of something real." For the first time since I was a teenager, I was walking into an unscripted future, and I wasn't afraid. That Sunday, the Boston Society pages scrambled to frame what was already being dubbed the Avery Unveiling. Headlines ranged from the diplomatic 35th anniversary, Gala takes an unexpected turn, to the blunt, Avery family ethics questioned after daughter's bombshell speech. Mason sifted through the coverage with calm focus, sorting media reactions into folders for Aurora's legal and communications teams. "The narrative's fracturing, predictably," he observed, sipping coffee at the breakfast table in our temporary loft in Tribeca, our last day before transitioning to his actual penthouse. "Old guard circles are circling the wagons for your parents, but the business press? They're fixating on documentation, not emotions." I nodded as I scrolled fashion blogs and trade newsletters already covering Rebecca's fraud, Williams' shell companies, and the misuse of the Veronica Avery Foundation. "Design media's calling it vindication," I said. "The blacklisted boutique owner is now the face of resilience." "And your mother? She's probably halfway to booking a publicist who specializes in misunderstood matriarchs." The professional fallout came swiftly. My father's real estate conglomerate, Avery Capital, faced a formal inquiry into charitable misappropriations. 3 board members demanded an emergency session, beginning what the press called a quiet leadership reckoning. 2 of my mother's long-held charity boards issued statements announcing her temporary leave to focus on family restoration. Then, a text from Fiona. "They're in meltdown," Dad's yelling. "Mom smashed her baccarat vase. Meet soon? I need an exit plan." We met at a cozy cafe on the Lower East Side. Fiona, always polished, looked shaken but determined. "The house is unlivable, she whispered. Mom's rotating between stone-cold rage and opera-level sobbing. Dad's locked himself in the study with their lawyers. Eleanor postponed their Hampton summer. Mom's calling it betrayal. Are you safe? I asked gently. Physically? Yes. Emotionally. That's another story. When I wouldn't go on record calling you delusional, she monologued for 20 minutes about loyalty. By Friday, Mason had helped Fiona secure a one-bedroom in Brooklyn Heights and negotiated her a design role with a sustainable architecture firm. Her true passion, architectural design, had always been dismissed by our parents as frivolous compared to the Avery real estate legacy they expected Fiona to uphold. Meanwhile, Mason and I began transitioning into the life we were finally free to build together. His real home, a breathtaking penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, revealed the parts of him he had concealed for far too long. I've owned this place for nearly 5 years, Mason told me as we stepped into the sun-drenched living room framed by floor-to-ceiling windows. But it never felt like home. Too quiet, too solitary. It didn't feel solitary anymore. The space, like Mason himself, combined thoughtful elegance with warmth. Nothing ostentatious, but everything intentional. Custom shelving displayed a fascinating mix of philosophy, global finance, and vintage sci-fi novels. The sleek kitchen with its professional-grade appliances revealed another hidden side of him, his love of cooking. His now unlocked home office held dual screens, market dashboards, and notes scrawled in his precise handwriting, a true command center. You maintain the facade flawlessly, I said, pausing at the threshold of his office. No wonder Aurora's competitors never saw you coming. He smiled slightly. I've spent years mastering strategic invisibility, but personal connection? He reached for my hand. That's what I was missing. Until you. Our marriage, once a calculated alliance, had shifted. Respect gave way to something far deeper. Shared trials had laid the foundation for trust, and trust had quietly opened the door to love. It was unspoken at first, embedded in long glances over late-night takeout and mornings spent planning our respective futures. But it was real. 3 weeks after the gala, a courier delivered an envelope from my parents' attorney, what they called a reunification framework. Essentially, a glossy PR recovery strategy disguised as a family agreement. It included NDAs, scheduled public appearances, and the implication that I should be grateful to be let back in. They're still writing the script, Mason noted dryly, flipping through the pages. Same roles, different stage. I sent back one line. Reconciliation begins with truth, not optics. Meanwhile, Grace and I refined my new boutique concept. A fashion incubation hub focused on sustainability and underrepresented designers. Your instincts were never wrong, Grace affirmed. You just needed a structure that matched your vision. Aurora provided the seed capital, not as a favor, but as a real investment. Mason made that clear. This is merit, not mercy. And you? You're the brand worth believing in. Mother approached during the reception, her carefully neutral expression masking whatever emotions churned beneath. Selena, she said, voice composed but quieter than usual. Your ceremony was elegant. I nodded, unsure whether to brace for critique or brace for honesty. Thank you for coming. She hesitated, then added, Your father and I didn't realize how much we'd lost until we saw what you've built without us. There was no apology, not yet. But for Veronica Avery, acknowledgement was its own seismic shift. People change when they're ready, I replied, gently but firmly. And sometimes, they just don't. She blinked, clearly unused to not being the one to define the terms. Then, for the first time in years, she didn't try to correct me. She simply returned to her seat beside my father, who'd spent most of the evening nursing a club soda and avoiding eye contact. Mason found me shortly after, slipping an arm around my waist with practiced ease that still gave me butterflies. How'd it go? She spoke, I said. That's a start. He smiled, nodding toward the horizon where the last of the sunset bathed the harbor in gold. Not bad for a couple who met through a contract. I leaned into him, breathing in the comfort of something real. Not bad at all. By the end of summer, Avery Atelier had landed features in 3 major fashion publications, not as a scandalous comeback, but as a model for ethical design and personal reinvention. Olivia's collection sold out their first 2 runs. Fiona's eco-focused building proposal for our second location had just won a regional innovation grant. And me? I wasn't the daughter trying to prove anything anymore. I was a woman who had learned, brick by broken brick, that family isn't about nameplates or lineage. It's about choice, truth, and the courage to rebuild from the ashes of deception. So when people asked how I survived the fall from the Avery legacy, I simply said, I didn't fall. I jumped. And I landed exactly where I was meant to. The ceremony was understated and elegant, precisely what we wanted. My mother, Veronica, offered the closest thing to approval she could manage. "The dress suits you," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming," I replied, simply and sincerely. "It matters that you're here." My father, Raymond, kept his distance for most of the evening, but eventually approached Mason, his tone surprisingly earnest. They spoke quietly about Aurora's latest venture, green tech partnerships in underdeveloped regions. For once, it wasn't about social standing or leverage. It was just business, real business. 1 year after the rooftop ceremony that rewrote our story, Mason and I began a quiet tradition of our own. Dinner at the same neighborhood bistro where we once plotted strategy instead of sharing affection. On this anniversary, we exchanged truths rather than tokens. I never expected happiness from our arrangement, I admitted. At best, I hoped for tolerable coexistence. I didn't believe I deserved more. Mason reached for my hand across the table. "I planned for a strategic alliance and a temporary inconvenience," he confessed. "I didn't anticipate needing someone, or being known so completely." The modest apartment where we first shared awkward silence and cheap takeout had become Fiona's first independent home. A quiet gift from us, a launchpad free from the weight of our family's legacy. She was thriving in her architecture firm, finally designing with freedom. The boutique flourished too. Olivia and I launched a designer incubator within the atelier, pairing funding with mentorship. It wasn't just fashion anymore. It was future building. My relationship with my parents became something cautious but livable. We practiced boundaries, no sweeping reconciliations, no revisionist storytelling, just limited, intentional moments grounded in reality. But most significantly, the woman who once entered a forced marriage believing she was broken and in need of correction, she had changed. I had changed. Strength, I learned, wasn't about rising above humiliation. It was about refusing to believe I belonged in it. The people who tried to humble me only led me to the person who truly valued me. And the life I was forced into became the one I chose, with eyes wide open. And that made all the difference. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening, for witnessing, and maybe for seeing me. My story might sound extraordinary on the surface, arranged marriage, betrayal, hidden wealth, but beneath all that is something painfully ordinary. A woman trying to be seen and valued for who she really is. If any part of my journey resonated with you, being underestimated, silenced, forced into boxes that don't fit, please share your thoughts below. I'd love to know. What would you have done in my shoes? What moment hit home for you most? Your comments remind me that I'm not alone in this, that many of us are walking through life trying to reclaim our voices after being told we don't get one. I never imagined I'd find strength in such an unexpected partnership, or that the path to healing would begin with everything falling apart. But now, I realize something important. Your worth isn't defined by your title, your family name, or anyone else's opinion of you. It's defined by your courage to rise again and again in the face of people who would rather keep you small. So if you're still in your version of that cramped apartment, trying to piece yourself back together, keep going. Keep showing up for yourself. The life that's waiting for you may not look like the one you thought you wanted, but it just might be more beautiful, more real than anything you imagined. If you believe stories like this matter, please consider subscribing, not just to follow mine, but because you never know who needs to hear the truth next. Maybe someone out there is still sitting in silence, waiting for permission to start again. Let's give them that permission. Together.